I can't browse the web right now to pull or quote the very latest papers, so I'll summarize the published evidence and the biologic mechanisms up to mid-2024 and explain the consensus, the controversies, and practical, upbeat takeaways. Short answer: skipping breakfast reliably changes the body's short-term glucose dynamics and brain fuel availability, which often impairs morning concentration and creates hormonal signals that can increase appetite and metabolic stress. And over months to years, it's been associated with higher risk markers for weight gain, insulin resistance, and cardiometabolic problems in many population studies. That said, the picture isn't black and white. Randomized trials, individual responses, and controlled intermittent fasting protocols show that timing interacts with what you eat, how active you are, and your habitual rhythm. Below is an integrated review of mechanisms, short-term effects on focus and metabolism, long-term outcomes seen in cohorts and trials, important nuances, and positive, practical steps you can adopt immediately. When you skip breakfast, you alter a tightly coordinated morning sequence of hormones and energy flows. Overnight fasting lowers blood glucose and depletes some liver glycogen. At waking, the body expects two types of cues: light, to reset the master clock, and food, to cue peripheral metabolic clocks. If food arrives, insulin sensitivity, which is naturally higher in the morning, helps shuttle glucose into muscle and liver for immediate use or storage, and cortisol, which peaks in the morning, tapers appropriately as energy becomes available. If food is withheld, cortisol can remain elevated longer, ghrelin, the hunger hormone, stays higher, and the brain runs for longer on progressively lower glucose and alternative fuels. These changes explain the predictable short-term effects: reduced sustained attention, more mental fatigue, and a stronger drive to seek quick energy sources, usually sugary or high-fat snacks, later on. Cognitive effects are among the clearest short-term consequences. Laboratory and crossover feeding studies repeatedly show that skipping the first meal impairs aspects of attention, working memory, and mental endurance for many people during the late morning. The brain demands a steady supply of glucose. Even modest hypoglycemia or wider glucose variability reduces the neural efficiency needed for concentration and complex problem solving. Practically, many people report increased irritability, distractibility, and difficulty finishing sustained tasks on days they skip breakfast. Importantly, composition matters. Breakfasts that combine protein, slow carbs, and healthy fats give a much steadier cognitive benefit than high-sugar pastries, which produce a brief lift and then a slump. Metabolic consequences in the short term go beyond cognitive effects. Eating early leverages a window of higher insulin sensitivity. That means the same carbohydrate eaten in the morning is usually handled with a smaller glycemic excursion than if eaten late at night. When you skip breakfast and then eat large amounts at lunch, you provoke larger postprandial glucose and insulin spikes. Those repeated acute spikes increase oxidative stress and can impair endothelial function and satiety signaling over time. Skipping breakfast also tends to increase later-day energy intake for many people. Hunger builds, ghrelin surges, and decision fatigue makes high-calorie choices more likely. The combination of larger meals, snacking, and glucose variability is what creates metabolic stress even if total daily calories are similar. Longer-term evidence is more nuanced but concerning. Large observational cohort studies across different populations have repeatedly found associations between habitual breakfast skipping and higher body mass index, greater waist circumference, and higher incidence of type 2 diabetes and cardiometabolic risk markers. These studies cannot prove cause and effect. Confounding by lifestyle, sleep, activity, socioeconomic status matters, but the associations are consistent enough to be taken seriously. Randomized controlled trials provide a clearer causal lens but are harder to run long-term. Shorter trials show that when people are forced to skip or eat breakfast for days to weeks, many experience worse glucose control, higher insulin secretion after later meals, and greater subjective hunger. Conversely, trials that test shifting calories earlier in the day, front-loading calories into breakfast and lunch rather than dinner, often show improvements in glycemic control, fat oxidation, and sometimes modestly faster weight loss. So the aggregate evidence suggests that eating regularly in the morning supports better metabolic regulation for most people, while habitual skipping is a risk factor for metabolic dysregulation for many. There are, however, important and hopeful nuances. First, individual variability is large. Some people, especially those adapted to time-restricted eating or well-designed intermittent fasting, feel and perform fine skipping breakfast and show metabolic benefits because the rest of their day is tightly structured, they're active, and they avoid overeating later. Second, the composition and regularity of meals matter more than a simplistic breakfast or nothing rule. A nutrient-dense, balanced breakfast stabilizes hormones and cognition. A sugar-heavy breakfast can be worse than skipping one. Third, context matters. Night shift workers, people with certain medical conditions, or those with disrupted sleep may need a tailored approach that prioritizes circadian alignment and glycemic control over a universal timing rule. Mechanistically, the pathways that connect skipping breakfast to long-term risk are plausible and testable. Repeated postprandial spikes, chronic elevation of stress hormones, impaired insulin signaling, increased inflammation, and disrupted peripheral clocks in liver and gut all contribute to insulin resistance and weight gain over time. Skipping breakfast also tends to be a marker for other behaviors, late bedtimes, irregular eating hours, low physical activity, that collaborate to worsen metabolic health. From a cognitive and behavioral perspective, the pattern of fast all morning, then overconsume, trains reward circuits to prefer calorically dense, low-nutrient foods, undermining dietary quality over months and years. The good news is that the evidence also points to practical, positive interventions you can take that have immediate and cumulative benefits. Establishing a consistent morning eating window, even a small, balanced snack if you're not hungry for a full meal, signals your circadian clocks, stabilizes cortisol and ghrelin rhythms, and reduces the likelihood of large compensatory binges. Choosing breakfasts with protein, eggs, yogurt, legumes, tofu, healthy fats, avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oil, and slow carbs, oats, whole grains, fruit, sweet potato, improves insulin responsiveness and keeps glucose steady, which sharpens focus and wages a direct assault on mid-morning cravings. Hydration and morning sunlight amplify these benefits. Water or herbal tea before food and brief exposure to daylight help set the master clock and improve mood and alertness. If you're experimenting, try simple, measurable steps for a few weeks and notice how you feel. Pick a consistent time to eat within 1 to 2 hours of waking, include a protein source and some fiber, and aim to front-load a meaningful share of your daily calories earlier in the day rather than late at night. Monitor not just weight, but energy levels, concentration, sleep quality, and cravings. For many people, these subjective measures shift quickly and meaningfully, often within days, and objective measures like fasting glucose or fasting insulin can show improvement in weeks if timing and composition are consistently adjusted. In summary, skipping breakfast creates immediate changes in brain fuel and hormone signals that commonly impair focus and destabilize glucose control. Over the long term, habitual skipping is associated with higher risk markers for weight gain and metabolic disease in multiple large studies, though individual response and the structure of the rest of your daily eating pattern are critical moderators. The optimistic takeaway is that breakfast is a potent and accessible tool when you use it intentionally, consistently timed, nutrient-dense, and aligned with morning light and sleep routines. It supports sharper thinking, steadier moods, more efficient metabolism, and better long-term metabolic health. If you want, I can next provide a week of sample breakfasts that balance protein, healthy fats, and slow carbs for sustained focus and stable blood sugar.